Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with the Dicey Review, and today we're going to be doing an overview of the new expansion for the Quest kids, the Big Bads of Tolks Cave. I would like to mention quickly that these are going to be using pre-production components, so the final components will probably look slightly better, and also there's a dice tower featured in this video that is going to be a Kickstarter exclusive item. The expansion, Big Bads of Tolks Cave, comes with all of the components that you see here. And I want to reiterate that all of these components are pre-production and will look slightly different after the campaign has been finalized. But a lot's changed from the base game and been added. First and most notably is the new character Flint. You can see his miniature standee and player board all laid out here. You'll also see the addition of action dice and their matching reference cards. These action dice are unique to each character and helps you resolve the new events in the game, which are also shown here. There's also the addition of new item cards, which we can look at in more detail in a moment, a completely new deck of dungeon tiles, a Kickstarter exclusive dice tower, and new Big Bad attack cards for each villain, as well as Quest Kid attack cards that you can use when facing the Big Bads at the end of each scenario. It's also important to note that there are new treasure tokens that are specific to Flint as well that can be mixed in with the rest of the treasure tokens. One other major update to the expansion is that it allows the game to be played at a 5-player count, which is also really cool. Now that we've talked about all of the new components, let's look at how you incorporate and use each new aspect of the expansion. One of the changes in the Big Bads of Tolks Cave expansion is that each character now has a set of action dice. Each character has slightly different die faces, and a player can see which face their dice have by looking at these reference cards. For instance, the player controlling Ivy will have more sneak faces, whereas the player who controls Crash will have more of the teamwork yellow symbols. These dice will allow players to have events and attack the Big Bad at the end of the scenario, but we'll go into more detail about that in a moment. So to use the expansion, you'll still use the game board from the base game, and you'll shuffle and use the dungeon tiles in the exact same way as you would when setting up the base game. Each of the tiles from the expansion has the expansion symbol on the top right of the card. After shuffling, you would distribute the red tiles on the right side of the board just like normal, and after shuffling, you would distribute the green and the gray tiles on the left side of the board in their spaces as well. You don't use the Tolk gems in the expansion, but you will use the treasure tiles like normal, placing them in the bag. And you can also place the treasure tiles for Flint in the bag. If using the new character, you would go ahead and place the player board near the playing area, and then go ahead and place the appropriate miniatures or standees next to the entrance of the dungeon. If playing with Flint, he starts off with a wisdom card just like Ivy. Then you would shuffle the item cards and place them near the play area. Shuffle the green and red event cards and place them near the play area, and then each character would be given their set of action dice and their action dice reference cards. And each of the action dice sets and action dice reference cards that aren't being played by characters can still be placed next to the play area because the characters can use these dice during gameplay. Players can also have the dice tower set up to use near the play area if they want to use that during gameplay as well. When setting up the quest deck, players should make sure and remove the Gain 1 Tolk Gem quest, as Tolk Gems won't be used in the expansion. Health cards are set up and given to each character in the normal way. You would also need to place the Big Bads card or tile near the play area, as this tile will collect cards during the game and make the encounter at the end of each scenario more difficult. You'll also want to find and collect all of the Big Bad tiles for the particular boss that you want to fight at the end of the scenario. Now for the Kickstarter, we only have the tiles for the Big Bad Dazzlin', so we're going to be using those for this example. Those tiles can be placed near the play area, and after that's done, you're ready to start playing. Big Bad's of Tolks Cave comes with a lot of new features. Some of the first differences that you'll notice are on the different dungeon tiles. On some of the cards you'll see either/or choices, like the one indicated here, and you'll also notice a new icon in the tile that indicates item cards. If a player chooses to receive an item card on their turn, they would be able to draw the top item card from the deck. There are 3 different types of item cards in the game. Armor, which is indicated by a gray background, weapons, which are indicated by a golden background, and potions, which are indicated by a pink background. Armor and weapon cards will give players ongoing special abilities that they can use for the rest of the game. And each item card will describe how the item works. For instance, the golden goggles would allow players to redraw a treasure tile, but only once per turn. And the power hammer would give players the ability to use 1 less purple card when scaring away bad guys. Potions are typically one-time use, and some of them have to be used immediately, and others can be used whenever the player wants, or even at the end of the game. For instance, this potion would allow a player to re-roll any number of action dice, but would then be discarded. Players can keep their item cards fanned out underneath the campaign cards section of their player board. It's important to note that a player can only ever have 1 of each type of item at a time, but if a player ever wants to replace their armor or weapon, they can simply discard their old one and keep the new one instead. There's also a new dungeon tile type where players will have to draw and resolve event cards. If a player turns over this tile, they would still collect it as it's worth victory points at the end of the game. Each player, starting with the player who discovered the tile and then in clockwise order, would draw and resolve an event card of the indicated type. For instance, this card would have players resolve a green event. After each player has drawn and resolved their event cards, it would then be the next player's turn. Every event card in the game will present the hero with a problem, and then a couple of different options on how they can try and solve that problem. For instance, this card has the players facing off against some goblins and also dealing with a sticky spider web. To resolve this event, the player would either need to roll 1 of these symbols on 1 of their action dice, or 1 of these symbols on 1 of their action dice. Before a player rolls dice to resolve an event, they have to declare out loud which option they're choosing. Let's say, for instance, Ivy were the one having to resolve this event, and she chooses to try and fight the goblins as a team. She would like better odds at passing this event. The good news is that players can ask their friends for help. If a player asks one of the other characters who's playing in the game for help with their dice, this player can choose to give 1 of their dice to the person asking for help, and then they would receive a Kind Kid card for helping in this way. In addition, players can also use the dice from the friends that aren't playing in the game. For instance, Ivy could use 1 of Crash's yellow dice, which would be ideal in this situation. To use action dice for players that aren't in the game, a player would have to discard 1 ability card to the Big Bad tile. The big boss encounter at the end of the game will be more difficult the more cards are on the Big Bad tile. The maximum amount of dice that a player can use when trying to pass an event is 3. But once a player has selected all of their dice, including any dice from their friends, they would roll all of them to try and pass the test. So let's say in this example we're trying to roll 1 of the yellow teamwork symbols. The player controlling Ivy has gotten 2 of the needed symbols, so they would pass this test. If a player passes the test, then they would get the reward indicated with the green check mark. If a player isn't able to roll the needed symbols, they would have to resolve the negative effect next to the red X, in this case having to discard 1 ability card to the Big Bad tile. It's also important to note that there are item cards that may significantly help the players whenever they're trying to do battle or succeed during events. After a character has fully resolved an event card, the next player in turn order would then fully resolve their event card following the same steps as we just showed. When setting up for a Big Bad's encounter, first find all of the attack cards for the selected Big Bad at the start of the game. In our preview we have Dazzlin'. Shuffle those cards and place them here. Then, depending on the player count, the big boss will receive a certain number of health. In our 2-player example, 4 health will be used, and it's important to note that the boss's health cards will look slightly different than the player's health cards and award more points at the end of the game. On top of the base health amount, the big boss will also gain health based on how many cards are on the Big Bad tile. In our example, with 5 cards, the Big Bad would gain 2 additional health. Then place the character figures on the spaces shown, and then prepare the Quest Kids attack deck. To do this, remove any attack cards that show a higher player count than who's playing. So in this example, in our 2-player game, anything with 3 heroes or above would be removed from the Quest Kids attack deck. After this is done, place the Quest Kids attack deck in the space shown. You're now ready for the Big Bad's battle. There are always two phases in this battle. First, the big bad will attack, and then the quest kids will attack. To resolve the big bad's attack, first, place a face-down big bad attack card beneath each player figure. Then, simultaneously, all players will reveal their attack cards. Then, all players will resolve their attack cards, either simultaneously or one at a time in turn order, depending on your preference. These attack cards will work in a very similar way to event cards during the game. They'll have the name of the attack, present two options for each character to try and overcome, and then a reward or a penalty based on if they pass or fail the test. Similar to resolving events, with battle cards, players have to declare which option they choose before selecting and rolling any dice. One difference with these attack cards, however, is that players can't voluntarily give up their dice in exchange for kind kid cards to help. Players can, however, still discard ability cards to receive extra dice to roll to try and pass these tests. So for instance, if Flint discarded this card to ask for Skylar's help so that they could block, this player would be able to roll these dice to try and pass the test. Since they rolled a wild in this example, they would pass the test and gain 1 treasure. It's important to note that a player can roll a maximum of 4 dice this way when trying to pass these tests by discarding up to 2 ability cards. It's also important to remember that when attacking or defending during the Big Bad's battle, you should check your item cards to see if any of these items have helped you pass the tests. After each player has resolved their attack, these cards would be discarded next to the attack deck. Next, the quest kids would attack. This step involves turning over the first quest kid attack card, and then the players collectively deciding which attack option they would like to choose. If the players choose a one-hero attack option, they'll choose one of the characters to resolve this test. For instance, Flint could decide to attack with this option. In a similar way, a player can't give up one of their dice in exchange for a kind kid card, but ability cards can be discarded to borrow for the test. So after discarding a card, Flint could be able to roll these 3 dice. If the attack is successful, the characters will take one of the hearts from the Big Bad's pile. If the players chose a team-up option instead and were successful, each player in the team-up attack would take one of the hearts from the Big Bad's pile. If the players didn't choose one of the team-up options but chose a single attack like in our example, another attack card would be revealed, and any characters that haven't attacked yet would need to choose one of the options and resolve an attack attempt. If there are still hearts remaining in the Big Bad's health pile, then you would start the process over again, beginning with another round of Big Bad attacks. If the Big Bad's health pile is ever fully depleted, the characters will win, and each player would count their points to see who had the most epic journey. If a player ever loses their last health card, they'll be knocked out and they won't be able to participate in the Big Bad battle anymore. The other players can still participate and try and defeat the Big Bad, however. If all players lose all of their health, then the Big Bad has been victorious. Each player should still count all of the cards in their victory piles to see who had the most epic adventure. Alright everybody, that was our video. Thanks so much for watching. We hope that it was helpful and informative. If you have any questions, please comment below or email us directly at thedicey@gmail.com and I'll do my best to answer those questions. You can always connect with us on social media or by visiting our Board Game Geek Guild. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you at the table.